Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Zochreinu l'chaim. Remember us for life. I'm really excited to teach this. It's certainly in this season of Elul very much in all of our anxieties and thoughts and prayers that we are not only leading services that are spiritually meaningful, but also we want to inform ourselves in our practice. So what I have planned for us here is a little walk through some of the text and the history of some of these pieces of liturgy, as well as a bunch of musical selections, most of which I'm sort of giving to you as a present for your own perusal later, because it's hard to sing choral pieces over Zoom. But let's get on into it. If you want to be able to follow along, the best thing to do is to download the PDF packet that I made for today. So the URL is there. It's tinyurl.com/Zochreinu. So if you just go to that, you'll be able to download a PDF packet with some of the text and all the music that we're going to be looking at. And you should keep that for your keep that for later as a little present. Let's dive in. So we're talking about these four texts that stand together as part of the Amidah on High Holy Days, right? Zochreinu l'chaim, mi chamocha av harachamim, uchtov l'chaim tovim, and b'sefer chaim. Right? Obviously, chaim, life, is one theme that runs through all four of them, and they have always been tied together from the very beginnings of the time that we talk about them in Jewish liturgy. Though that may be surprising to know that's not necessarily as far back or as consistent as we think about. So we're going to notice that you will not find these texts in the Talmud. The first place that we hear of them existing is in Masechet Sofrim. Sofrim is what you call a minor tractate of the Talmud. And though you will often see it referenced as saying it's like 8th century from the land of Israel, that's just wrong, and it's not supported by the text itself in a lot of ways. So I can give a whole separate lecture about the history of Masechet Sofrim, but safe to say, though, it does have substantial influence from the land of Israel as opposed to Babylonia, right? As opposed to the rabbis of the Babylonian Talmud. It's most likely a little bit later than the 8th century, and maybe even a European creation. In any case, that's an aside. So, right, we see in Sofrim, and if people have lots of questions, I invite you to put them in the chat. I see your question, Mandy. Let me see if I can tinyurl.com/Zochreinu. That should work. Okay, so just as the seals of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right? Kashem shechatimatan shel Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim mishuneh misha'ar yamim tovim. They're different from all the other times. So too are their tefillot, are the prayers themselves. And then look at this: ve'ein mazkirin zichronot begimel rishonot uvegimel achronot. You don't say these, right? This is a classic rabbinic instruction, ein ella. So you only say these things in the first three blessings, the last three blessings, in the 2 days of Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah, and then on Yom Kippur only. And even on those, bikoshi hitiru. Right? So we don't know who the they is who allowed this with only some difficulty, but it seems like what we're reporting in this not clear exactly when, but early-ish piece of our liturgy, that people want to say these lines, which means they are pre-existing somewhere, and maybe only on the days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur themselves, not as we do for the entire 10 days of repentance. And there's some force out there that wishes we wouldn't say them at all, right? Only with some difficulty. Bikoshi hitiru. We're only allowed, maybe, they would rather we not say them. that's a fascinating thing for something that seems like sort of innocuous. Like, what could possibly be the problem with adding these things to the liturgy? And yet there's a resistance. So it gets, we find evidence of it in some of our sources. So we're looking at, this is a copy of Maimonides' Mishnah Torah. That is the physical copy of it found in the Cairo Geniza. And why would I go to the Geniza if I'm just quoting Maimonides? Because Maimonides is not as consistent as you think. Like the accepted received version of Maimonides that we have is one that's gone through a lot of editing processes and all that kind of stuff in the past, and also frequently with prayer texts in Maimonides. The way that prayer texts are given seems to vary by the locality that wrote down that copy of Maimonides. So every scribe, who was writing it down felt relatively empowered. If Maimonides says this is how a prayer text goes, that scribe might feel like, oh, perfectly great. I'm just gonna, make it. But that's not how that prayer goes. I'm gonna fix it to the way that I know it, right? And in fact, in this one, there actually is a distinction between the way that we're used to, which I'll show you in a minute, right? So Maimonides says, Rosh Hashanah nahagu rov ha'am, right? Most of the people, Rosh Hashanah ve'ad Yom Kippur lehosif b'chol tefillah be'aser jimei tshuva. So people say, most people do this, but not everyone, right? When they say, Zochreinu l'chaim el melech chafetz b'chaim b'chodfeinu, clearly that says there b'sefer, right? But it's missing. Hachaim lifanecha. Oh, interesting. That's a new word. L'ma'ancha Elohim chaim, melech rachaman Moshiach, Magen Baruch Ata Adonai, Magen Avraham. Right, and it goes on and on with describing the other ones, and there's some slight differences. So when we're looking at a history of liturgy, it actually is interesting to look at even the way that Maimonides has written in the Cairo Geniza. One thing I'll say about it's a curiosity about Maimonides and his Seder Tefillot Kol Shana. Right, we're used to Maimonides being cited, chapter and verse. You always say like, Maimonides, Laws of Tshuva, chapter 5, number 2, or whatever. This section of the laws of tefillah, he doesn't do that. It's actually just one long bunch of these. There are different editions that have enumerated it, but every edition has enumerated it differently. Maimonides himself just kept it going on a stream here, really different from any other place in the entire Mishnah Torah. But what's a part that it's not here in the picture because the picture was long enough as it was, but look at the next line. B'chol elu hatosafot minhag mikomot. All these things are a local custom, right? V'yesh mikomot shenahagu shelo leosifu davar. Some places they don't do this at all. Again, we're seeing that there's this thing that we sort of identify as just a standard piece, apparently is not done everywhere. There's differences in the way that people do it, and there's some places where they don't do it at all, right? I think that's, for me, that's always been a sort of fascinating piece because now it's part of the accepted liturgy of everywhere. But to note that it's one of these later additions that came in and took and really took root everywhere. So I'm going to show one other piece of Cairo Geniza, which I think this is sort of just a cool thing to notice. Oh, is that still there? Hold on, I don't know why those there we go. Okay, so. Look at this. Gomel chasadim tovim v'konei hakol zocher chastei avot umevi goel livnei v'nehem. Right, familiar. Notice there's no leman shmo be'ahava here, but that's within the range of different texts. Zochreinu l'chaim melech rachaman chafetz b'chaim. Now the thing you're probably noticing is that the vowels here are all on top of the words instead of on the bottom of the words. Right, so this is a Cairo Geniza fragment that we know actually comes at that time before the standardization of how the vowels were written. Right? There's a great history to be read about how Hebrew punctuation came to be. Right? So there's one thing to notice the slight differences, like Melech Rachaman Chafetz B'chaim is an interesting sort of distinction between the text that we know and love. But part of the sort of fun, and the reason I gave this graphic to you in the packet is so you can sort of enjoy seeing this ancient piece of liturgy written in a very clear and sort of lovely handwriting with the vowels written on top of all the letters. And there's multiple voweling systems that were going on in the ancient world before we settled on the Tiberian system that we all depend on and teach our bar mitzvah kids. That's just a cool piece. And right when you browse through the Geniza, there's many more such fragments to find of the ways that these texts have wound their way through the liturgy. So now we're going to go sort of one by one through all four. And we're going to use the text from Mishkan HaNefesh as our sort of root text to look at here, right? So Zochreinu l'chaim, you'll notice in this format, every phrase ends with the word chaim, with life. Remember us for life, sovereign God who treasures life. Inscribe us in the book of life, for your sake, God of life. It's a pretty important reminder of for a lot of us, there's one of the things I've sort of always tried to remember, a lot of us are operating on a Jewish liturgical calendar that, Rosh Hashanah has its real function as the beginning of the new year. Certainly for us, for Cantors, we think about, our pathway of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Hanukkah, etc. And the place where a lot of our congregation is thinking is they're thinking of a life cycle moment. So Rosh Hashanah may not be the beginning of a Jewish year so much as a moment in their life and a check-in on their life. And I think this prayer really sends that home. Looking at Seder Rav Amram Gaon. Right, so remember, Seder Rav Amram Gaon is the very first full prayer book that we have. A lot of provisos about any time you quote from Amram. Amram was not a well-preserved text, so every time some medieval copyist made their own edition, they made a lot of changes. So there is no available ur text to really know exactly what Amram wrote. So that's why there's these brackets and stuff like that in here, because different manuscripts going as far back as we have are very different from each other. So anytime someone quotes you and says, this is what is in Amram Gaon Sidur, you always have to sort of take it with a grain of salt because you don't know. And sadly, we don't really have a great critical edition available to really judge that. So what does he have? So Zochreinu l'chaim, El melech chafetz b'chaim, v'chotbenu sefer chaim l'ma'ancha, Elohim chaim in one version, or El chai, umagen. Now the umagen part is interesting in terms of the ways that it relates to. It's a much more common tendency of Sephardic liturgy that always wants to come back to the word that's going to be in the Chatimah before at the end of the blessing. Almost every time a slight difference between Sephardic and Ashkenazim will be the Sephardim will make an effort to hit the word that's in the Chatimah at the end of the blessing. So we see that here from this version, at least, of Rav Amram. So let's look at how that plays out in the four different great Siddur traditions. Right, so Ashkenazi, I think we all know pretty well. I have a little recording here to play that's sort of entertaining of a Breslev Chassid sort of davening it, which I enjoy. I bet none of us take that kind of time between words that much in our shuls with all the ois and the drang, but it's got a lot of kavanah. Right, you'll notice in this one, like the Sephardim and the Ashkenazim are really pretty close to each other. The Yemenite maintained this El Chai piece. Nobody actually keeps that Umagen thing that was in Seder of Amram, right? And the Italian, again, is very similar. So this one comes out pretty similar, right? The Italian says Mancha El Chai instead of Elohim Chaim, which feels pretty much the same. So it's interesting to see the ones where they're very much the same, and we'll see later there's some where they are quite different from each other between the various Siddur traditions. I see Mandy says she couldn't hear the recording. Maybe, I'm not sure how to play recordings yet on Zoom. I'm going to have to figure out how to do that. Maybe better for the future. So I have a few sources here. to really look into Zochreinu. So the first question is, why Zochreinu? What does it have to do with Avot? Right? So Yaakov ben Asher, who's the author of the Tur, right? Sometimes the Tur is the short name, Arba Turim is the main name of it, right? The Tur is the source document that stands behind, right, later the Shulchan Aruch that we know and love. So I want to so I'll as you hear from Neil, so you couldn't hear the recordings. So I'll just skip the recordings, and there's not that many anyway. So the Tur right stands behind the Shulchan Aruch. He's a sort of interesting guy in terms of how he skirts both Ashkenazi and Sephardic tradition. And let's see why he says we have Zochreinu, right? So Taknu lahosif b'virkat magen Zochreinu l'chaim. Right, we should add Zochreinu in there. Why? Ki b'chaim nofel lashon zechira, because we have an association with life and remembrance. Dichtiv, as it says in Yechezkel, and here this is sort of a funny game that he works, where he quotes from verse 27 first and then back to verse 22. But okay. Uveshuv rasham rishato, when an evil person turns back, kol psha'av asher asa lo yizkeru lo, v'tzidkato asher asa yichyeh. Right, so here we have tshuva tied up with zikaron, tied up with chayim. Right, so actually he's getting three things in here together. You're turning from your evil ways. Things are there's a aspect of memory here, which is funny here. It's about not being remembered, but still, and then life. So further, since the Chatima of the Avot is about Avraham, Magen Avraham, what does that have to do with Avraham? Uchtiv Zechira b'Avraham, right? Zechira, remembrance, is written with Abraham. Ki zachar et devar kodsho, etc. Vagomer, right? So Abraham has a connection to remembrance. So Abraham Abraham's connected to remembrance. Remembrance is connected to life and to tshuva. Boom, lefichach tiknu zechira b'magen. It's a very sort of funny halachic reason, and as we know, what Yaakov ben Asher is actually doing here is he has this received tradition that we say Zochreinu l'chaim at this moment, and he is working backwards to come up with a midrashic answer for it. Linda, can you mute yourself? I see you just joined us, Linda.
How do I mute myself?
There should be a little thing in the corner with like a little microphone.
Hi, Stuart. It's Albert.
Okay, I'm going to keep going. So, continuing on about Zochreinu l'chaim, and Linda, there's a packet. If you look in the chat, there's a packet you want to download with all the information. So Eliyahu Eliezer Dessler, very important Haredi rabbi who was in London and was in Israel for a while, and his 6-volume Michtav Eliyahu, made by his students. It's a beautiful book. Like the center of it is about a sense of God's chesed. I couldn't recommend him more as a person that we might be interested in learning from, even with him being a sort of contemporary Haredi rabbi, not so contemporary, right? He died in 53. So what is the book, right? HaSefer shekotev bo Hashem yitbarach hu nefesh ha'adam. The book is our soul. Shaban yirshamim kol ha'ma'asim v'chol ha'machshavot. Our acts and our thoughts are written down in this book. Tahainu, as it says in Avot, in Pirkei Avot, kol ma'asecha b'sefer nichtavim. Right, your acts are written in a book. And then sifrei chayim v'sifrei metim. Right, books of life and books of death, and that we have in the Talmud in Rosh Hashanah. And then in Unatan Tokef, v'chotam yad kol adam bo u'me'elav yikareh. Right, so we have multiple texts that are talking about this book and things being written in it about our acts and our deeds. So, imken, kotvenu b'sefer ha'chaim, write us down in the book of life. That itself is a tefillah l'siyata dishmaya. It's a prayer for the help of heaven. Shenizkeh lehir Hashem b'nafshenu l'chayei kedusha. We should merit an inscription within our own souls for lives of holiness, of forgiveness, of atonement, of sustenance, of kalkala, professional success. Ki kol elahem totzaot shel matzavo pnimi shel ha'adam. Right, these things don't come from outside; they come from inside. The book is not some external book that's up there in heaven as a ledger. The book is actually your own self, and the extent to which you've been clear with yourself and holy with yourself. I think that's an incredible refiguring, because so much of us get so caught up in the sort of difficult mythology of this book, and now you don't have to, right? In this even Haredi understanding. I put in these beautiful prayers from the Kol Neshama Machzor, from the Reconstructionist Machzor, right? May our deeds be deeds of life. May our lives be lived for the sake of God, of the God of life. Then our own hands will enter our names in the book of life. A really beautiful rephrasing of, I think, something very similar to what Rabbi Dessler said there. I'm going to leave Richard Hirsch's text for a moment. You can read it on the screen. We're gonna keep going because I've got a lot of material to cover. I love that. We remain emotionally rooted in the language and the images that are from the past. We may not believe the literalness of the book, but that image is just so compelling. Two readings that are in Mishkan HaNefesh that are worth pulling out if you want to have a focus on these, on 168 and 169. I think especially this one on 168 really struck me, right? Does this mean God is liable to forget us? Right? If we're praying for God to remember us, does that mean we're worried about being forgotten? Perhaps instead our prayer expresses our wish to live the kind of life that God treasures, a life worthy of remembrance. Again, ways to refigure what the book is and what it is to be remembered. We're going to keep going on to the second piece, right? Which in Mishkan HaNefesh is Mi Chamocha El Harachamim, one of the changes made in the book. You can feel how you feel about it, about changing Av Harachamim, the Father, to the God of compassion. I personally don't like that particular change. I think the image of Av Harachamim is a beautiful sort of mixed gendered image as it is, right? Father of mercy. But here we go. Who compares with you? You remember all creatures for life. So Rabbi Yitzchak Eliyahu ben Shmuel Landau, he was connected to the Musar movement. His Sidur commentary Dover Shalom is a really beautiful work with a lot of psychological insight into the prayer book. It's downloadable on Hebrew books, but the font is a little bit hard to read. You can see in the picture, it's one of these like old looking things that you have to sort of really commit to being able to get the worth out of it. But it's a really, there's a lot of genius in this book. So I love this. B'chukei HaTeva, the laws of nature. She'a'av ohev levanav. Right? Parents love their children. Okay, they should anyway. Ve'apo'el ohev pe'ulato. And a worker loves his work. Leval tiyeh l'rik, lest the work should, be for nothing. Ve'etzel haborei yitbarach, and with God, who's the creator, mitachdim shnei anyanim yachad. The two sides come together, Father and Creator. Mi chamocha av harachamim, right? Who's like you, Father of mercy? Al banav, right? God, you should be like a parent to us. Umi chamocha zocher yitzurav l'chaim barachamim. That's like a worker, like a poel, who is worried for his work that he did. He worked hard on that stuff, so he should get to have it and see it. Umelitzat avarachamim shalifi melitzat lashon haya me'arui lomar av atoladot, so avarachaman, right? Maybe instead of avarachamim we should have said avatoladot, father of generations, or avarachaman, a description, a compassionate father. What does it mean to say av harachamim in this case? And this is what I think. This is one of the most brilliant turns that Rabbi Landau makes here. Yitachein, right? It seems to me that says Olam Chesed Yibaneh, a phrase a lot of us have heard a bunch of lately. She Habriya Bekolel Nivret Rak B'Darchei HaChesed V'Harachamim. Whoever that is there, can you mute yourself so that we are? I hear some non-muted stuff. Right, so if it seems that Olam Chesed Yibaneh, the entirety of creation is made through grace and compassion. Therefore, you can call the entirety of creation rachamim. Everything is rachamim. There's nothing that is not rachamim. Therefore, haborei shebara'am is av harachamim. God is by father of compassion. It means then the father of all creation. What a cool way to take these two symbols and pull them together. I'm really taken by it as a brilliant sort of interpretive move there. I would say, I know it's a little tricky to dig through old 19th century Siddur commentaries, but this guy is worth your consideration. And the book is available. You can download it on HebrewBooks.org or .com, wherever it is. It's there, available for free download. So let's look at what Rav Amram said. Uvesofa Gibor, right at the end of the Giborot prayer, Mazkir, one says, Mi chamocha av harachaman. Oh, look at that, right? Just a minute ago, right, we were just reading that Rabbi Landau here says you should say, wouldn't it be better if it said av harachaman? And then it does, right? Mi chamocha av harachaman, zocher tzarav birachamim l'chayim, v'ne'eman atalecha metim baruch atah Adonai mechayim metim. And then let's look at how that breaks down in the different traditions, right? So us and the Italians are the ones that say Av Rachamim. Sephardim and Yemenite say Av Harachaman. So it's an even divide there. Right? And the Italians are interesting that say Zichor Yitzurecha. Remember your creations, turning it really into a second person address, which I think has something really beautiful to speak for it there. Right? Instead of God as the third person away, who's like Mi Chamocha, keeping in second person, right? Who is like you, Father of mercy? You remember your creations in mercy, as opposed to us, Ashkenazim, who is like you, Father of mercy, the one who remembers his creations. The Italians, I think, have something there in their tradition. I enjoyed this comment from Rabbi Sachs in the new Machzor, right? Isn't it amazing that all these new Machzorim have come out in just a little while with fantastic commentaries for us? Right? This, the second of the special prayers for life, echoes two phrases in the blessing itself: Mi Chamocha, who's like you, and Racha, and compassion, thus weaving the request into the text and the context of the Amidah. So this is not a random piece here. It really is connected directly to the text of the Giborot. And from Lev Shalem, from the conservative Machzor, right? Jewish mystical tradition highlights the theological tension between God's qualities of power and strict judgment, and God's qualities of mercy and loving kindness, between Gvura and Chesed. Throughout the year, right, this is usually about Gvura, about God's unsurpassed power. But now, at this season of judgment, we add this line to remind us and God that God is also unsurpassed in mercy. That's a beautiful comment that really, I think, does have a profound just change of direction in the ways if you're psychologically walking your way through the prayer book, through the prayer. We focus so much on God's power, especially on Rosh Hashanah, even more than on Yom Kippur. So to really refocus our turn towards God's mercy at that moment is a big turn. Let's look at the third piece. Uchtov l'chaim tovim, kol b'nei vritecha. Now, interestingly, right, who is, the immediate question is, who are the people of your covenant? Right? The way we translate it in Mishkan and Nefesh, inscribe your covenant partners for a life of goodness. So who's in the covenant? Which covenant? Right? The easiest assumption is all Jewish people, sure. But would it be so hard to presume like a Noahide covenant? Maybe we're talking about humanity and not just Jews in that moment. And maybe that's an interesting psychological reframing that we could use here. So let's see what we have in the history of our liturgy, right? So again, Rav Amram, Uvim Modim, and in the Modim prayer, one adds, and then look at this whole line here, which we don't have in our Reformed liturgy anywhere. And in a traditional liturgy, you'll find it, and in the traditional Ashkenazi liturgy, you will find this more or less, pretty much exactly the same, in the Chazin's repetition of Musaf is where this text comes back, but not ever in the congregation never says this to themselves, and it's not in Shachri, right? Zichor rachamecha uchavosh kascha V'chalei dever, v'cherev, v'rav, v'mashchit, v'magefa, v'yetzer hara, v'sinat chinam, v'avodah zara, v'chilul Hashem, v'chol machala, v'chol tkala, v'chol ktata, v'chol gzeira ra'ah me'aleinu, u'me'al kol b'nei vritecha. Right, so that is an essential part of this High Holy Day. Right? So that's a big piece to throw in there in the middle of our prayer of gratitude. It's a very intense bakasha, right? To remove all those things, all those terrible human failures, for the most part, right? From us and from all the people of your covenant. And then he goes on, Ve'al kulam yibarach, etc. Tamid shimcha malkeinu leolam va'ed. And then he says, sort of strangely, uvehoda'ah, and in the gratitude prayer, which is also modim, mazkir b'sof, one adds at the end, uchtov l'chaim kol b'nei vritecha, v'chol l'chaim yidu chasela v'halul shimcha baruch atah Adonai hatov shimcha l'chana elod. Right, so the sort of weirdness of the fact that he says here, uvehoda'ah mazkir b'sof, makes me wonder about the textual history of Rav Amram, and maybe one piece or the other is an addition of some scribe at somewhere, and maybe because it would be weird to have the first say back here in Modim one says, and then the next line to say, and in the Hoda'ah one says. So there's something maybe going on there that indicates a problem with the text. But either way, these are two pieces that are slightly separate from each other. We'll see how they get pulled in together, right? So I'm reminding in Ashkenaz, this only comes up in the Chazin's repetition of Musaf, right? So we know, right, where it fits. Uchtov l'chaim tovim kol b'nei vritecha in the Ashkenazi tradition. In the Sephardic tradition, right, it comes in a different spot, right? Because then we have, after that, we say v'chol l'chaim in Ashkenazi. In Sephardim, they go v'chol l'chaim yidu chasela, and then uchtov l'chaim tovim. So it's in a different position in the prayer. Sort of interesting. The Yemenite tradition, they retain some of this language of remembrance here. So that's a sample of that longer text that Amram had, and then Uchtov l'chaim tovim, right? So the Yemenites retain some of that older piece of something from Amram, which is sort of an interesting thing to note. And the Italians are the one who gave the whole, who they kept basically the whole thing. And the Italians are the only tradition that kept that for the whole of High Holy Days, that they insert this whole thing. Slightly different from Rav Amram, but still there. And so it's always fascinating to see when you see big changes like that. It means that this liturgical piece happened quite late, and that people made. It's not in the category of things that are so old and come from so far back that there's not necessarily memory of choices being made. You see this much difference between the liturgical traditions. It means that that's a medieval change, and that there's sort of an ongoing debate about exactly what the right pathway is through that. So I'm completely fascinated. In Mishkan Nefesh, they push this phrase about Jewish peoplehood, right? Clearly saying Kol B'nei Britecha is Jews, which is sort of fascinating for me as a choice for Mishkan Nefesh to make, since I think there is an arguable position that Kol B'nei Britecha might be other. You could argue for other covenants, and it seems like that would have been more consistent with a sort of Reform Universalist perspective about what we're hoping for in the world. But it is an interesting thing to imagine dwelling specifically in that moment on a closed sense of peoplehood, and the people of your covenant as meaning strictly Jews. David Teutsch, always a wonderful teacher of Torah here, right? The attitude of thankfulness portrayed in the Modim prayer above comes near the end of the Amidah, as if to say that by this time we should be ready to acknowledge how much is outside of our control, how many gifts we receive, how much we have to be grateful for. On the High Holy Days, we ask that all the people of your covenant be written down for a good life. And here, look at this definition of covenant. To be part of the covenant is to accept the obligation of a stance of thankfulness, which itself conveys the possibility of leading a good life. There is an extraordinary definition of covenant. I find that very moving as an expansion of the idea, right? To accept the obligation of a stance of thankfulness, which I think we all sort of fight with, is something that's very difficult for us 21st century people to sort of fully embrace what we should be thankful for. I wanted to also share this really interesting insight from this Meir Orlean, who was a modern Orthodox rabbi, mostly in Israel, but not only. And this one's a little lengthier, so I'm going to summarize a little bit, but I think it's brilliant. Right, so, Uchtov l'chaim tovim, this piece in Modim, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the rest of the prayer, he notices first. It's a good notice, right? What does that have to do with anything? In truth, one might even wonder why we're praying so intently for life. As long as we're alive, our souls need our bodies. Wouldn't it be better for the soul to be freed? Right? Wouldn't it be? Doesn't the soul want to be enjoying the radiance of Shekhinah and not to be held prisoner here? Right? So there's something, maybe, I guess, a Neoplatonic philosophy there about the soul being unhappy being with us. There's some interesting Hasidic thought about that too also. Our sages said, right, Lo Ameitim Yahaluka, right, Psalm 115, Va'anachnu nivarechya, but we, the living, bless God. A person should busy themselves with Torah and mitzvot before their death, because after death they cannot, and the Holy Blessed One does not receive praise from them. So, like, when you're alive is your time to praise God. That's why we desire life. Though our soul would be happier up there, that's where the soul can do work. That's where the soul can do work. But the soul derives more happiness up there. But the place where the soul does its work, where we do our work as humans, that's here in this world. When the Vilna Gaon was dying, it's told that he grabbed his tzitzit in his hands and said, "How beautiful is this world where for a pittance a person can buy tzitzit with which to fulfill a commandment." This blessing at the end of Thanksgiving, at the end of the Amidah, is not merely being polite and saying thank you for all of our requests. Rather, it's an essential part of our worship and part of the core of our mission in this world. The thanks is only possible for us to offer when we are actually alive. It's appropriate at the time that we thank God and declare the universalist sentiment that all life will thank you. We pray for our own life so that we might continue to offer praise in this way. It's really I think it's a profound moment at the time of Rosh Hashanah where we consider life, when Yom Kippur, we consider life and death, right? That this additional prayer that we may get to enjoy life, and that all the people around us, right, all these people in this covenant would get to enjoy life as part of our gratitude, because it's only that way that we are able to express gratitude. It's a powerful piece here. So the final addition, right, B'Sefer Chaim. We all have, I think, there's a lot of melodies of B'Sefer Chaim in the world, and I think, right, it goes right in on this question of the book. May it be a life of peace. I think that the translation in Mishkan Nefesh does an interesting job of breaking this up into 3 sentences, which Hebrew has that problem of often having run-on sentences. Let's look at what it says in Amram. Right? Uvasim shalom maskir v'sof, uvesefer chaim, bracha v'shalom, ufarnasa tova, v'shua v'nechama, ugzerot tovot, nizacher v'nikatev lefanecha, anu v'chol amcha Yisrael, l'chaim u'l'shalom, baruch atah Adonai hamvarech et amo Yisrael b'shalom. Not very different from what we say, mildly different, but they're sort of within the realm of what things you could more or less ignore. Look at the differences between the various traditions. Right? Our Ashkenazi one we know. The Sephardi one here, it's very similar. It includes the Yeshua and Nechama and Gezerot Tovot that was in Rav Amram. And otherwise, it's pretty much the same. The Yemenites, they just don't really say any of that. Uvasefer Chaim Bracha V'Shalom Nizaker V'Nichatet. Right? They even leave out the Parnasat Tovah. Sort of interesting to have the Yemenites really some are cutting things out there, and the Italians even add in Chen B'Chesed as a piece of it. So again, there's a substantial amount of variation, all within a similar theme, but still an interesting amount of variation in this prayer, more so than one might expect. So we're going mystical here. Right? Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal, one of the really most interesting Kabbalists, and is really contemplative, and is sort of not was separated from Lurianic Kabbalah in interesting ways. So, Hine ha'adam nidun techila al pi ma'asav limanot b'tzadikim o b'reshaim. Person is judged first by their deeds. Are you counted amongst the righteous or the wicked? V'zen nikra mamash sefer chaim v'sefer metim. Right. So there you go. Book of life, book of death. Dehainu. Hanikba ben atzadikim, hu anichtav b'sefer chaim. If you're with the righteous, you're in the book of life. V'anikba ben reshaim, hu anichtav b'sefer amitim. If you're with the evil people, you're in the book of death. V'atalui, but someone who's in between. V'ha'omed hu abenuni. This person who's standing up is sort of in the middle. She'ein dino nigmar ad Yom Kippurim, but their judgment is not done until Yom Kippur, as we usually say, right? It's the middle people who we're praying for in these sections. So happens, there's lots of things that are decided for us. Maybe a tzaddik will be longing for it, will be missing something. Right? Because he's a righteous person, he might have to suffer. Maybe because of his righteousness he'll succeed. And the evil person the same way. Maybe he'll be so successful specifically because he's evil and he's cheating. Maybe he'll be missing something or he'll suffer too. Right? So all these things are going to come flow from that first judgment. Right? Of all these things for good life, and then following that for b'sefer chaim, etc. Rabbi Luzzatto sort of goes on and gets even more theoretical, but it is right. By the time you get to b'sefer chaim, he's saying the question of life and death, by that point in the prayers, is somewhat resolved, and now b'sefer chaim is an opportunity to be thinking about all the other pieces that we're asking for decree over the course of a year. And we know that some of us are, certainly some of our congregants over the course of a year, they're thinking about employment, they're thinking about, are they going to have a child? They're thinking about health, they're thinking about quality of life, they're thinking about all kinds of things. And life and death questions, or maybe by that point we're meant to have those slightly out of our mind, and b'sefer chaim is our time to think about what kind of life we're going to lead for this next year. It's again an interesting reframe. I really enjoyed this comment that was in Mishkan HaNefesh. For us, the book of life has been reduced to words of casual welcome, spoken on written cards, L'shana Tova, Tikatevu. The book of life, I wonder, is that all it means today? When I hear those words to me have meaning. I do not see a ledger in the skies wherein my fate is written, signed, and sealed, nor do I see some greeting card bedecked with gaily colored scenes where on the bottom line, unvocalized, appear the words L'shana Tova Tikatevu. The book of life to me is a symbol. It says to me, you are recorded. What you say is more than words whispered into the wind. What you are is something more than pebbles on a beach. What you do has an effect. Very powerful rephrasing of the symbol that we just throw out there all the time. And I think we've all gotten a lot of those cards. So I want to go to the music, but before we go to the music, I want to pause for a second if people have, because we still have 15 minutes to go through a lot of music, but that's okay. If there's questions or thoughts that people want to share, I would love if you can unmute yourself and share something if you have something you wanted to say, or you can put it in the chat. Either way, or we can just keep going. Okay. I'll keep going if you want. You can interrupt. So mostly on the music here, and if you don't have the packet, you should go I'm going to put it again in the chat. so that so that you should be able to download it. It's a tiny URL / I'm gonna just redo it one more time here. tinyurl.com/Zochreinu. So I put it again in the chat. You can download it. And mostly what we're going to do is I'm going to sort of walk you through. I tried to curate, and I tried to mostly put things that you probably don't already have or know. And also things that I'm able to share without violating a lot of publishing difficulties, because that's important too. And some things that you have, but you probably didn't realize they were really good and sitting on the shelf. So it's always good whenever you're looking at anything and davening to go back to Bear. I know that a lot of us, it sits there on the shelf, with all the yellow out-of-print classics books that you probably don't open enough. But boy, is there really good stuff in Bear. And I want to just even look at that first melody, right? AW means an old melody. His melody there for Zochreinu. It's actually a really serviceable, usable, lovely melody, right? Zochreinu lechaim, melech hafetz b'chaim, v'choteveinu b'sefer ha'chaim, v'mancha Elohim chayim. Easy to consider on the other. Melech. Going on from there. It's a lovely melody. And one that probably almost none of us remember or ever really paid attention to, right? The second piece there has the more chazonish ones, right? Zochreinu lechaim, melech hafetz b'chaim. Chazonish is good, right? But it's really interesting to note that the first thing he puts is a tune, which has to say this is a congregational refrain. Is his first concern is that even and as he's thinking about the essential piece of Nusach, his first consideration of that is congregational refrain. You'll notice that Mi Chamocha, the first part, NW means a newfangled thing, meaning something by a relatively contemporary composer in the new style of 19th century Germany, right? And which is also melodically oriented, and the bottom one is a sort of restatement of the same thing from Zochreinu. I thought it was very interesting on the next page that Uchtov L'chaim Tovim, he's actually got a choral setting there, right? A 4-part choral. It's very unusual for Bear to include actual 4-part choral music. So that's another piece that this is really something that's meant to jump out from the liturgy in a profound way. I also would commend to you the first melody, the B'Sefer Chaim melody there. That's at the first one, where it says choir. It's a really very lovely melody, and is worth knowing and learning and sharing and including. We don't have to only sing Goldfarb all the time. So I was delighted. Usually you look in Bear for like sort of an obscure piece of Nusach, and this is a good reminder that there's also really wonderful melodies in Bear that have history and feel Jewish without necessarily feeling nostalgic, which I really like. I'm going to keep on blasting through because I got 10 minutes, a lot of stuff here. So after Bear, the next thing you have in the packet is Zolzer. Interesting to reconsider Zolzer. Right? Zolzer's pieces here are all very, very straight up major. They're really avoiding any sense of old school Ashkenaz. Right? Zolzer's not afraid of being very old school Jewish, and these pieces are straight up major, 19th century Viennese style. I think the melodies are also lovely, and I could imagine, and also very easy for a congregational choir. By the way, if you're looking for something just lovely and simple, and maybe a break from the intensity of how much of our High Holiday services are big and majestic and sort of scary. This is pleasant and lovely for the ear, which has a nice value. I do want to note, interestingly, look at the B'Sefer Chaim on there by Joseph Drexler. Joseph Drexler, not a Jewish composer. He was actually a close friend and student of Beethoven's, and had an association with Zolzer because when the synagogue in Vienna was built, actually the community approached Beethoven himself and asked if he would write for them a piece for the dedication of the synagogue there. And Beethoven wrote a very lovely letter saying what a great honor it was to be asked, and how he would so enjoy writing a piece for the synagogue. And he's just a little booked right now, a little too busy. So would they mind if he had his friend Joseph Drexler do it instead? And there began an association that Joseph Drexler had with that synagogue in Vienna. And so there's a number of pieces by Drexler that appear in the Zolzer books. They're very classy, I have to say. It's lovely writing. It's a really beautiful piece, and for some of you who are interested in sort of coming up with interesting pieces to present in teaching Jewish musical history, this church organist friend of Beethoven's setting of Sefer Chaim might be sort of a historical curiosity, but it's also a beautiful one at that. So it's worth sort of reminding yourself that it exists. We're gonna go to Naumburg and Israel Loewy. I don't have any pictures of Loewy, which is really a shame, but Naumburg we know. Loewy was the director of the Consistoire in Paris before Naumburg, well before Naumburg, actually. There was a substantial gap between the two where they just couldn't find anyone as good as Loewy for a few decades until Naumburg came around. So this is actually Naumburg's version of Loewy's tune. Again, it's very straight up major, but it's just a beautiful setting of Zochreinu, and has sweetness and charm to it, right? Zochreinu lecha. It's a lovely sort of march in its own way. I couldn't love it more, is the truth. I think it's just a classy setting, stately in its own way, but has a real charm to it, and it is reflective of sort of both Loewy and Naumburg's ties to the French opera, but it's not operatic at all. It's a very contained and lovely sort of small piece in that way, and the Micha Mocha Av Harachamim, which is straight up Naumburg himself, is also just this lovely thing. All right, it's lento, piano, and then pianissimo. How shocking is that in the moment of the grandeur of High Holiday services to pull way back and to implore God's mercy with this just sweet, preciously, beautifully written, slow piano piece to really invoke mercy in that way. I haven't found the way to put it in for myself yet, but it's on my short list of things I want to be able to craft the right environment to be able to include that plea for God's mercy. I'm going to keep going because I have now only 6 more minutes and a lot of music. The next one is here as another sort of interesting piece, Émile Jonas, or Jonas, depending on which country he was living at the time. He was a French opera composer who was also the organist and composer of the Sephardic synagogue, sort of at the same time, post-Naumburg, more or less. And his whole book is written in 3 parts. It's unfortunately not the 3 parts that we cantors would like. And we want everything to be an SAB, and he was part of the sort of French school at the time that did not believe in the existence of alti. So all the altos in the session, I'm sorry, but he believed only in soprani. All women were soprani. So, so it's soprano, tenor, bass. Berlioz felt the same way. It's a beautiful, easy melody. His book is downloadable online through there's some German universities where you can download this stuff. It reads like a dream. It's very simple. It's bright. It's lovely. It's set to the Sephardic text, which can also be an interesting piece here. So it's worth reading, and you can have your volunteer choir could master it in about 20 minutes of rehearsal or less. The next piece I want to put up here is Gorovich, right? Where we basically only think of Gorovich for his Adon Olam, but there's so much other greatness in him. These are really fascinating for me because they're a sort of way of doing a choral recitative, right? Zochreinu lechaim, melech hafetz b'chaim, v'chotzveinu b'sefer chaim, u'mancha Elohim chaim. Right? It's really and even more, look at the Sefer Chaim. The Sefer Chaim bracha v'shalom u'farnasa tova. Right? It's really this fascinating sense of a unison chant that's in chords. They're not really melodies. They're really sort of simple chants that have been arranged this way. It's a very cool effect, almost like some sort of organum kind of thing what's going. A different sound than probably people are used to hearing from their choir. So I put that there, less necessarily for the beauty of those individual pieces, but this sort of technique of a choir almost free chanting, but in chords, which I think is a really fascinating sound that's been lost from our synagogues. That's worth maybe considering how we could use it. The next person here, this is a setting I put almost, it's too good to ignore, but it sort of makes you giggle. Right? Samuel David he followed Naumburg in Paris. Anyone who's a Beethoven fan, Zochreinu lechaim, taken right out of the piano sonatas, and it's this lovely, touching setting, and hard to do without a little bit of a giggle from people who are lovers of classical music. But also one of the things that might be really fascinating to do in a sort of synagogue history class of a time when that was seen as what a great choice, right? The most popular thing at the time was Beethoven, so why not have Beethoven in synagogue? It sings like I've only had the chance to actually sing it through with a choir one time, but everybody just left happy from singing it because it makes you feel good. It's always fun to remind ourselves of Stark. We think of the Stark Kedusha as sort of one of the few pieces that we remember anymore, but this is a lovely Zochreinu. Intense, but not that hard for a choir to master. And I really enjoy, right, in the second line of it, this v'chot ve'nu b'sefer ha'chayim. Nice choral texture. It's a lovely short piece to really be able to enjoy in there. I'm going fast because I got a lot here. This next stuff is from Samuel Lempel, who's a composer you've never heard of, most of you. He was the cantor in Leipzig right before the Shoah, and in fact was killed in Auschwitz. And this is really for a much more advanced choir, as you can just even see looking at it. It's difficult. It's a difficult piece. His voicings are just incredible. And I wish that more of us knew his music better, because boy, is it brilliant. This is a composer who wrote exciting music that we just don't know. He's got a Matovu that I was able to perform with a choir here in Chicago a few years ago that will knock your socks off. This guy is worth your interest and knowledge, and these are really stunning settings. I will say, especially, I think that the Sefer Chaim is just a beautiful thing, truly beautiful thing. Me being the cantor at KMSA Israel, it's hard for me to not share Max Shanowski's setting of the Sefer Chaim. This is one of his French-influenced pieces. There's a whole category of Shanowski where he sort of he was madly in love with Ravel, especially. And this one, if you play it on a piano, will sound like Satie. Honestly, it sort of sounds like one of the Gymnopédies if you just sort of play it by itself. It's a beautiful setting. I have a lot. I think it has a lot to offer as a really wonderful setting of the text. The choir coming in this Anachnu, Anachnu. I've also done this on guitar, by the way, and it works beautifully also. It doesn't have to be only piano or organ. It's a good piece to remind yourself that it exists. The one thing that is unfortunate about it is that it does not include a Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo from the choir. But oh well. The next piece I gave you is just sort of the original copies of the melodies that most of us probably end up doing, right? Which is the Goldfarb from the Synagogue Melodies for the High Holy Days. It is always interesting to note the ways that things have changed over time. I bet none of us go V'chot beinu b'sefer chaim l'mancha Elohim chaim V'chot beinu b'sefer chaim l'mancha Elohim chaim. A lot of us ended up already shortening it. Maybe go V'chot beinu b'sefer chaim l'mancha Elohim chaim. And he had that extended out a little farther. It is interesting to note that he also has an Uchtov L'chaim Tovim in there. Right? That was also something he felt needed to be brought out separately. And the B'Sefer Chaim melody in there also is a little bit different than the way that most of us probably sing it. But it's such a classic, wonderful melody, and I included in there for you not only his original, but also the truly beautiful choral arrangement of it that Joyce Rosenzweig wrote, that she does with her choir at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah in New York. It's a wonderful, not complicated arrangement. So if you have even a volunteer choir, they can really sing this to great effect. It's a wonderful arrangement. Now I have a few sort of tunes. I know I'm already over time, so if you need to go watch the recording later. I grew up with this Mudgets tune. This is my Cantor Arnie Schultz back in my shul at home. We would always do Zochreinu, Zochreinu l'chaim, Zochreinu, Zochreinu l'chaim, Zochreinu, Zochreinu l'chaim, Oy melech hafetz b'chaim, Zochreinu b'sefer ha'chaim. Is that familiar to people? I've always loved that tune. It works beautifully. It comes right in, like it goes right out of the Nusach, right back into the Nusach. There are other mudgets, Zochreinu l'chaim. The mudgets tend to write like 12 melodies a day, but this is one of I think the most beautiful ones that they have there. And I would put it in the same category as the next one, which I've only sort of come to recently and I really enjoy, which is Carlbach, right? I know there's questions about Carlbach these days, but this is a melody that I just really, really enjoy. And it's not one that I knew at all. I never grew up hearing this. I only sort of came to it recently. But Zochreinu l'chaim, melech, melech, hafetz b'chaim. I'm going to go to the next part. V'chodveinu b'sefer ha'chaim, lemancha, lemancha, Elohim chaim, because then you go to Yadadais forever. It's a really fun tune that can keep you busy for quite some time, and it also works to come back to it again. You can use it again for B'Sefer Chaim and use it as a refrain throughout. I have two sort of contemporary things. One is a V'al Kulam Yitbarach that I noticed when in Mishkan HaNefesh that it says V'al Kulam Yitbarach in Uchtov L'chaim Tovim. So this is a simple melody that I wrote for it. That was I had a friend do an arrangement for me because I was not in the mood to be able to do it at that time. But a really lovely arrangement of V'al Kulam Yitbarach, V'al Kulam Yitbarach, simple tune. And then with Uchatov L'chaim Tovim Kol B'nei Britecha, a nice little refrain there to get you. And it was specifically sort of conceived with the idea that in Mishkan HaNefesh, this is the text that's on that page. It starts with V'al Kulam Yitbarach, goes to Uchatov L'chaim Tovim, and ends with the Chatzimah. It's a very rearrange it, do with it as you will, or just use the melody, or don't use it at all. But it's something I could offer with no copyright concerns. So there it is. And the last piece of music in here is something by Joanna Dolkin, who told me I could share this. This is a very fun setting, right? She gives it a good, right? It's got a really fun tune there with the arrangement by Scott Stein, right? But right. B'sefer Chaim baracha v'shalom, B'sefer Chaim baracha v'shalom, u'parnas hatova nizacher v'nikatev, B'sefer Chaim baracha v'shalom. Right, so it's a fun. When you get by the time you get to the end of your holiday Amidah, and you could use. Sorry, I didn't change our picture. You could use a little fun, and then here's where she gets even more fun. Right, so the choir repeats the tune, but then. Right, so she gets to all different kinds of books, which goes back to that comment about the different kind of gezerot that we're hoping for this time of year. Right, so she goes, B'Sefer Biriyut, the book of health, and the choir goes, Nizacher v'nikvatev, B'Sefer Shelimut, Nizacher v'nikvatev, B'Sefer Zichronot, back and forth. It's a really fun piece. It's beautiful. The choir learns it easily. and it becomes a highlight of the High Holiday service that people by the end of the Amidah have a chance to lighten up. After you've been through Unatan Tokas, you might want to have a little respite. I do have one last piece of music. I said that was the last. I have one final one, which is a sort of cool Breslev thing where they take all four of the pieces and wind them up together into one melody. This is a little bit pan-Hasidic, but Breslev is the most closely associated with it. I think this is great. Zochreinu l'chaim, melech chafetz l'chaim, Zochreinu b'sefer ha'chaim. Oy oy lemancho, oy oy lemancha, oy lemancho Elohim chaim. Oy michamocha barachim, zocher yitzurav l'chaim berachamim. Oy uchtov l'chaim tovim, chaim tovim. O b'nei bitecha b'sefer chayim v'raka b'shalom u'parnasa toiva u'gzera tova Yeshua v'nechamot yizacher v'nikatei lefanecha u'nelachnu. Isn't that like, it's so catchy, you can't, now you're going to be singing it for the rest of the day. I get caught with that a lot. I love how it ties these four pieces together in a fun, right? There's that always, I try to keep in my mind as we get through the intensity of High Holidays, that Yom Kippurim is also Yom Kippurim, right? The day that is like Purim, where the joy of knowing that you've been forgiven. If you've done your process of Cheshbon Nefesh, you've done your process of Tshuva, you've got all these remembrances of life that you know you've done, there's a joy that's part of that. And if we don't capture that joy in our High Holidays, then we're missing something. My final insight is one thing that some of us know about the one change in Ashkenazic liturgy. This is only Ashkenazic. No one else does this. That at High Holiday season, we usually end with Hamvarechet Amo Yisrael B'Shalom for all the year, but on High Holidays, even in traditional Ashkenazi liturgy, Oseh Shalom, Maker of Peace. Our prayer at High Holidays can never be just for ourselves. I think it's one of the more important insights of Ashkenazic liturgy here, and fascinating that only we do it. And I actually was unable to find almost anything about why this is an exclusively Ashkenazic practice. And I like to look a lot of places, and I couldn't find almost anyone talking about it. But what a profound insight about what our High Holiday services are meant to be, right? In this place, we remember that Kol B'nei Britecha, all the people of your covenant, in this place is maker of peace for the world, right? The covenant is the covenant of life that we received from God following Noah, that we won't be destroyed. And somehow we're praying for God to remember that covenant at High Holidays. So I've given you a lot here, music and text. If we have anything that was presented on the screen that you want a copy of for yourself, that I didn't put in the packet, then please do send me a message. I'm happy to share with you. I want to put one plug in the air, which is that March 8th to 11th, if you're able to come to Chicago, we're going to have a really wonderful conference of Jewish liturgical music. People are coming from, academics and practitioners are coming from around the world for this. It's presented by the Mordechai Kaplan Center for Jewish Peoplehood. There's going to be a lot of information coming out about it soon, but mark it in your calendars, March 8th to 11th. And there's a Shabbaton with interesting worship experiences, followed by more of an academic conference on Sunday and Monday. So if you're able to come to Chicago, come, because you'll be happy you did. Most importantly, Shana Tova. Sing everyone right into that book of life. I hope everyone's services go flawlessly and beautifully, and that you not only achieve artistic excellence, but spiritual excellence as well. Shana Tova, everybody. I'm gonna, how do I,